The video was 43 seconds long. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo had watched it 11 times, and each time the image burned deeper into her mind. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves on his knees in the dirt, blood running from a gash above his eye. A masked man pressing a rifle barrel against the back of his skull, while a calm voice announced in accented English that the American commander would be executed in 48 hours unless their demands were met. 48 hours. The words echoed through the Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Valor as soldiers stood frozen, staring at screens that had gone dark. 6 men from the convoy were confirmed dead. Their commander was gone. And somewhere in the mountains of Khyber Province, a warlord named Qasim Farouk was preparing to add another American officer to his collection of propaganda executions. Before we continue with what happened next, drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Maybe you know someone who would go this far for the people they serve with. Yara stood motionless near the back of the room while chaos erupted around her. Officers shouted into radios. Intelligence personnel scrambled to analyze the video for location clues. Someone was already on the satellite phone to Bagram, requesting drone coverage and quick reaction force authorization. But Yara heard none of it. She was staring at the frozen frame on her personal tablet, at the man who had saved her career, her future, possibly her life, and she was calculating distances in her head. The Karangal Valley. That was where Farouk operated. 23 kilometers of the most hostile terrain in Afghanistan, a place American soldiers called the Valley of Death. Conventional wisdom said no rescue force could reach a hostage in that territory before the execution deadline. Conventional wisdom said Lieutenant Colonel Reeves was already dead. Conventional wisdom had never met Yara Okonkwo. She had served under Reeves for 14 months. He was the kind of commander who learned every soldier's name, who visited the wounded before he slept, who stood in front of congressional delegations and told them exactly what his people needed without caring about political consequences. But what he had done for her went beyond leadership. 18 months ago, when a board of officers had wanted to end her career over a judgment call in Fallujah, Reeves had walked into that hearing and spoken for 45 minutes about duty, courage, and the impossible choices soldiers make when lives hang in the balance. She still remembered his words. She made a decision under fire that saved 11 civilians. If that is the kind of soldier the Army wants to discharge, then we have forgotten what we are fighting for. They had not discharged her. Because of him, Captain Vance Hollister's voice cut through the noise of the operations center. Everyone, listen up. Hollister was the executive officer, which meant that with Reeves captured, he was now the ranking officer on base. He was 34 years old, academy-educated, and had spent more time in briefing rooms than in combat. I have just spoken with regiment. We are standing down all rescue planning until further notice. The room went silent. A sergeant near the communication station spoke first. Sir, we cannot just leave him out there. Hollister's jaw tightened. I am not leaving anyone anywhere, Sergeant. I am following orders. Regiment believes Colonel Reeves is being held in a location that would require a battalion-sized element to assault. We do not have that. We do not have air support available in the timeline. And we do not have actionable intelligence on his exact position. So we do nothing, another voice said. We wait for intelligence. We coordinate with assets that have the capability to execute a rescue. We do not throw more lives away on a suicide mission. Yara felt something cold settle into her chest. She knew Hollister was not wrong about the tactical reality. A rescue in the Karangal with their available forces would be extraordinarily dangerous. But she also knew something else. She knew that every hour they waited, Farouk would be working on Reeves. The warlord was famous for breaking prisoners before he killed them, for extracting names and locations and turning American soldiers into propaganda tools before putting bullets in their heads. She pushed through the crowd of soldiers and approached Hollister directly. Sir, request permission to speak privately. Hollister looked at her with barely concealed impatience. Staff Sergeant, I do not have time for individual concerns right now. Sir, I have reconnaissance experience in that valley. I did 3 patrols through the southern corridor last spring. I know the terrain. And what exactly are you proposing, Sergeant? Let me take a small team. For soldiers. We can move faster than a large force, stay below their radar, gather intelligence on the compound location. Hollister stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. Denied. I am not authorizing any movement into that valley until Regiment gives us a green light. That is final. He turned away, already barking orders at another cluster of officers. Yara stood still, watching him coordinate assets he would never deploy, draft reports that would sit in digital folders, manage a crisis by doing nothing at all. And in her mind, the clock was ticking. 47 hours now, maybe 46. She found Sergeant First Class Damon Kruger near the intelligence station, pulling up terrain maps on a laptop. Kruger had been her team leader for 8 months. He was 41 years old, with 22 years in the Army and more deployments than he could count. When he saw her face, he stopped what he was doing. "You're thinking something dangerous," he said quietly. "I am thinking about what the colonel would do if it were one of us out there." Kruger was silent for a moment. Then he turned the laptop toward her, showing a satellite image of the Karangal. "There are at least 4 militia checkpoints between here and the area where we think Farouk operates. Patrols every 6 hours on the main routes. Night movement only. And even then you're looking at dogs, tripwires, and locals who report everything to the Taliban." Yara studied the map. "What about the eastern ridge? The goat trails above the valley floor." "Possible. Slower. Maybe 30 hours of movement if you do not stop." "I was not planning to stop." Kruger met her eyes. "Hollister will never authorize it." "I know." The weight of what she was considering hung between them. Going outside the wire without authorization was a court-martial offense. Entering hostile territory alone was suicide by any reasonable assessment. And yet Yara could not stop seeing the image of Reeves on his knees, could not stop hearing the voice that had defended her when no one else would. Kruger reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table to her. "Those are the most recent patrol patterns we have intercepted. Radio frequencies, too. I updated them this morning." Yara looked at the paper, then at Kruger. "If anyone asks where I got this." "No one is going to ask me anything," Kruger said, "because officially, this conversation never happened." He paused. "You know you cannot save him alone." "Maybe not," Yara said, folding the paper and slipping it into her pocket. "But I can reach him, and that is more than anyone else is willing to try." She walked out of the operations center into the Afghan night. The sun had set an hour ago, and the mountains loomed black against the sky scattered with stars. Somewhere beyond those peaks, a man who had believed in her when no one else did was waiting to die. Yara checked her watch. 46 hours remaining. She had a decision to make. Yara did not return to her quarters. Instead, she moved through the base with purpose, gathering what she would need without drawing attention. A patrol pack from the supply tent, extra magazines from the ammunition point, signed out under the pretense of a range qualification she would never attend. Water purification tablets, a first aid kit, energy bars that tasted like cardboard but would keep her moving for days. She worked methodically, the way Reeves had taught her. Emotion is fuel, he had told her once during a training exercise that had pushed her to the edge of collapse. But planning is the engine. One without the other gets you nowhere. The memory stung. She pushed it down and kept moving. In the communications tent, she found Private First Class Tomas Estrada running diagnostics on radio equipment. He was 22 years old, fresh from his second deployment, and he had a habit of watching Yara during briefings like she was something worth studying. When she entered, he straightened immediately. "Staff Sergeant, what can I do for you?" "Estrada, I need a frequency scanner. Handheld, long-range capability." He hesitated. "Those are signed out to reconnaissance teams only. I would need authorization from." Yara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Tomas, I am not asking for paperwork. I am asking if you can help me." The young soldier looked at her for a long moment. Something passed across his face, calculation, a decision. He reached under his workstation and pulled out a black device the size of a thick paperback book. "This one has a cracked casing. I was going to report it damaged and request a replacement." He pressed it into her hands. "Battery is full. Range is about 15 kilometers in open terrain, less in the mountains." Yara felt a flicker of gratitude she did not have time to express. "If anyone asks, I have not seen you tonight, Staff Sergeant." She nodded once and slipped out into the darkness. Her final stop was the female quarters, a plywood structure she shared with 11 other women on the base. At this hour, most of them were asleep or on duty. Only one bunk had a light on, a small reading lamp that illuminated Corporal Adiz Namdi sitting cross-legged on her mattress with a novel open in her lap. Adiz was Nigerian-American like Yara, though they had grown up in different cities and found each other only after enlisting. She was 27, sharp-tongued, and the closest thing Yara had to a sister in the army. When she saw Yara enter with a packed rucksack, she set down her book. "Tell me you are not doing what I think you are doing." Yara did not answer. She moved to her own bunk and began checking her weapon, a ritual so familiar her hands moved without conscious thought. "Yara." Adiz swung her legs off the bed and crossed the narrow space between them. "This is insane. You heard Hollister. Regiment is not authorizing any rescue operations. If you go out there alone, you'll be AWOL. You'll be court-martialed. And that is assuming you survive, which you will not, because nobody survives the Karangal alone." "He saved my life," Yara said quietly. "He saved your career. That is not the same thing." Yara looked up, meeting her friend's eyes. "You were not there, Adiz. You did not see what they wanted to do to me after Fallujah. The way they looked at me in that hearing, like I was already gone, like I was just a problem to be processed and forgotten." She paused, the memory rising unbidden. "Reeves walked into that room and fought for me like I was his own daughter. He did not know me. He had no reason to stick his neck out, but he did it anyway because he believed I was worth saving." Adiz was quiet for a moment. "And now you think you have to return the favor. I think I'm the only one who will." The silence stretched between them. Outside, a generator hummed. Somewhere across the base, someone laughed, the sound strange and distant in the weight of the moment. Adiz sat down on Yara's bunk. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You remember what my grandmother used to say about debts?" Yara nodded. "A debt unpaid is a chain on your spirit. She said it to me before I enlisted. Told me the army would put chains on me I could not see. Rank, protocol, orders from people who do not know what they are asking." She looked at Yara with something like understanding. "But she also said some chains you choose. And those are the ones that make you who you are." Yara felt the words settle into her chest, confirming what she already knew. She reached out and gripped Adiz's hand. "If I do not come back, you're coming back." Adiz squeezed hard enough to hurt. "You're coming back, and you're going to buy me dinner at the nicest restaurant in Houston when this deployment is over." "That is not a request, Sergeant. That is an order." Yara almost smiled. "I thought I outrank you." "Not in this." They held each other for a moment, two women from the same soil who had found their way to the same war. Then Yara pulled away, shouldered her pack, and moved toward the door. Adiz's voice stopped her. "The eastern perimeter. Third guard rotation happens at 0200. There's a gap of about 6 minutes while they change shifts. Sensor coverage is minimal near the drainage culvert." Yara turned back. "How do you know that?" "I pay attention." Adiz picked up her book again, though her eyes were not on the pages. "Go save your colonel, Yara. And when you do, tell him he owes me too." The night air hit Yara's face as she stepped outside. The temperature had dropped since sunset, and her breath misted in front of her as she moved through the shadows between buildings. She knew the base layout intimately, knew which paths were lit and which were dark, knew where the cameras pointed and where they did not. At 0155, she reached the drainage culvert on the eastern perimeter. It was a concrete tunnel 3 feet in diameter that channeled rainwater runoff onto the wire. During the wet season, it was impassable. Now, in the dry months, it was merely uncomfortable. She waited in the darkness, counting seconds, watching the guard tower in the distance. At exactly 0200, the silhouette in the tower climbed down. His replacement would take 6 minutes to arrive, perform checks, and assume position. 6 minutes. More than enough. Yara dropped to her stomach and crawled into the culvert. The concrete scraped against her pack, her elbows, her knees. Dust filled her nostrils and coated her tongue. She kept moving, pushing forward inch by inch until she emerged on the other side of the wire, outside the protective bubble of forward operating base Valor. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her uniform, and looked back at the base one last time. The lights glowed against the mountain darkness, a fragile island of American power in a sea of hostile terrain. By morning, someone would notice she was gone. By afternoon, Hollister would be drafting charges. By tomorrow night, she would either be dead or court-martialed or both. None of that mattered now. Yara turned east toward the black mass of mountains where Qasim Farouk waited with his prisoner and began to walk. The clock in her head kept counting. 44 hours, maybe 43. Every step took her deeper into the valley of death. Every step brought her closer to the man who had believed in her when no one else would. She did not look back again. The mountains swallowed her within the first hour. What had looked like solid darkness from the base revealed itself as layers of shadow, each fold of terrain hiding rocks and roots and drops that could snap an ankle without warning. Yara moved slowly, feeling each step before committing her weight, using the faint starlight to navigate toward the ridgeline Kruger had shown her on the map. The goat trails, that was her path. The main routes through the Karengal were watched by militia patrols and dotted with checkpoints that appeared and disappeared based on Farouk's paranoia. But the high trails, the ancient paths carved by generations of shepherds moving their flocks between valleys, those were too narrow and too exposed for military vehicles. Too insignificant for regular patrols. Too dangerous for anyone sane to attempt alone at night. Yara was not feeling particularly sane. She was feeling the weight of 43 hours pressing against her skull, the image of Reeves on his knees playing on repeat behind her eyes. She was feeling the cold mountain air filling her lungs and the burn beginning in her thighs as the trail climbed steadily upward. She checked her compass every 100 meters, confirming her heading against the landmarks she had memorized. A distinctive rock formation shaped like a broken tooth. A dry stream bed that cut across the trail. A cluster of pine trees that marked the entrance to the high pass. Each waypoint appeared exactly where it should, and each confirmation pushed back the doubt that whispered she had made a terrible mistake. 3 hours into her movement, she heard voices. Yara froze mid-step, her body going rigid as training overrode instinct. The sound came from below and to her left, somewhere on the valley floor. Men talking in Pashto, their words distorted by distance, but their tone casual. A patrol, probably. Maybe a checkpoint crew passing time between shifts. She lowered herself to the ground slowly, pressing her body against the cold rock, and waited. The voices continued for several minutes, punctuated by occasional laughter. Then she heard an engine start, a vehicle moving away down the valley, and silence reclaimed the night. Yara counted to 60 before she moved again. Then she counted to 60 once more, just to be certain. The trail grew steeper as she climbed toward the pass. In some places, she had to use her hands, pulling herself up rock faces that crumbled under her fingers. Her pack caught on outcroppings and scraped against narrow gaps. Sweat soaked through her uniform despite the cold, and her breath came harder with each meter of elevation gained. She thought about Reeves during the difficult stretches. Not the commander she served under, but the man she had glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments. The way he rubbed his wedding ring when he was thinking hard about a problem. The photograph on his desk of 2 teenage daughters who sent him care packages full of homemade cookies that he shared with everyone in the Tactical Operations Center. The look on his face when casualty reports came in, that brief flicker of something broken before the mask of command slipped back into place. He was not just her commander. He was someone's husband, someone's father, someone who had given 24 years of his life to a country that was now calculating whether he was worth the risk of rescue. Yara pulled herself over a ledge and paused to catch her breath. The valley spread out below her like a dark ocean, scattered with the faint lights of distant villages. Somewhere down there, Farouk was sleeping in a compound full of armed men, confident that no rescue would come, confident that he held all the power. He was wrong. Dawn was still 3 hours away when Yara reached the pass. The trail leveled out briefly before beginning its descent into the next valley, and she allowed herself a moment of rest in the shelter of a boulder. Her legs trembled from exertion. Her shoulders ached where the pack straps had dug into muscle. But she was ahead of schedule. She pulled out the frequency scanner Estrada had given her and powered it on. The device hummed quietly as it swept through channels, picking up fragments of chatter from militia radios. Most of it was routine, guards reporting positions, supply requests, complaints about the cold. But one transmission made her go still. A voice speaking in broken English, probably for the benefit of someone who did not speak Pashto. The American colonel. He is strong. Farouk is impressed. But everyone breaks eventually. Tomorrow we begin the real interrogation. Yara's grip tightened on the scanner until her knuckles went white. Real interrogation. She knew what that meant. She had seen the aftermath of Farouk's methods in intelligence reports that still haunted her nightmares. Broken bones, burns, things done to prisoners that served no purpose except to demonstrate absolute power over another human being. Reeves was running out of time faster than she had calculated. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to plan. Panic was useless. Fear was useless. The only thing that mattered now was speed. Yara repacked the scanner and pushed herself to her feet. Her body screamed for rest. But rest was a luxury she could not afford. She began the descent into the next valley, moving faster now, accepting more risk with each step. A twisted ankle would end her mission. A fall from the trail would kill her. But moving too slowly would mean arriving too late, and that was a failure she refused to accept. The trail switched back down the mountainside in a series of sharp turns that tested her balance and her nerve. Loose stones skittered away beneath her boots and vanished into the darkness below. Once, she slipped on a patch of gravel and slid several meters before catching herself on a scrub bush that tore at her palms. She hung there for a moment, heart pounding, staring down into a drop that would have broken her on the rocks below. Then she pulled herself up and kept moving. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, Yara had covered 12 kilometers. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and operating on nothing but adrenaline and purpose. But she was also close. The village of Darwan lay somewhere in the valley ahead, hidden in the folds of the terrain, and with it the compound where Qasim Farouk held her commander. She found a concealed position among a tumble of boulders and settled in to wait out the daylight. Moving in daylight was suicide. The trails would be visible from the valley floor, and any shepherd or farmer who spotted her would report to the militia within hours. She had to be patient now, had to let the day pass while she rested and observed and planned her approach. Yara pulled her pack close and allowed her eyes to close. Sleep would not come easily, not with the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her chest. But she needed whatever rest she could steal. 36 hours remaining. Maybe 35. She was close now, close enough to taste it. And somewhere below, in a compound full of enemies, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves was waiting for someone to come. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the sounds of the valley waking beneath her. Goat bells in the distance. The rumble of a truck on an unseen road. Voices carried on the wind, too far away to understand, but close enough to remind her that she was deep in hostile territory with no support and no extraction plan. Yara opened her eyes to pale morning light filtering through the gaps in the boulders. Her body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. Every muscle ached. Her hands were raw from the climb, the skin torn where she had caught herself during the fall. But she was alive, and she was close, and that was enough. She ate sparingly from her rations, forcing down an energy bar that tasted like chalk and chemicals. Water was more precious than food out here, and she rationed each sip carefully, knowing that dehydration would kill her faster than any bullet. While she ate, she studied the valley below through a gap in the rocks. Darwan revealed itself slowly as the morning mist burned away. It was larger than she had expected, a cluster of mud brick buildings arranged along a central road that wound through the valley floor. Most of the structures were homes, simple dwellings with flat roofs and small courtyards. But near the eastern edge of the village, surrounded by a high wall topped with razor wire, sat a compound that looked nothing like its neighbors. Guard towers at each corner, armed men visible on the walls, vehicles parked inside the perimeter, including 2 technicals mounted with heavy machine guns. This was not a village elder's home or a local militia outpost. This was a fortress built to withstand assault and designed to project power over the entire valley. This was where they were keeping Reeves. Yara pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the compound layout, marking guard positions and patrol patterns as she observed them through the morning hours. The guards changed every 4 hours, she noted. The main gate opened twice, once for a supply truck and once for a group of fighters who arrived on motorcycles and were waved through without inspection. There was a secondary entrance on the northern wall, smaller and less trafficked, used primarily by what appeared to be household staff. She counted 19 armed men visible at any given time. There were certainly more inside. The odds were impossible. She knew that. 19 to 1, at minimum, with no element of surprise beyond what she could manufacture in the moment. A full platoon would struggle to assault this compound. A single soldier attempting infiltration was not brave. It was insane, but insanity was all she had left. The afternoon sun climbed overhead, and Yara forced herself to rest again despite the heat pressing down on her hiding spot. She would need every reserve of energy for the night ahead. As she lay there, eyes closed but mind racing, her thoughts drifted to a place she usually kept locked away. Fallujah. 18 months ago, a lifetime ago, she had been part of a reconnaissance team tasked with identifying insurgent positions ahead of a major clearing operation. Her spotter was Corporal Isaiah Webb, a 24-year-old from Georgia with a gap-toothed smile and a habit of humming gospel songs while he worked. They had been partners for 8 months, long enough to develop the wordless communication that kept sniper teams alive in combat. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Bad intelligence, shifting enemy positions, their Overwatch location compromised by a civilian who stumbled onto their hide site and ran screaming into the street. Within minutes, they were surrounded, taking fire from 3 directions, with no extraction available for 40 minutes. Isaiah took the first round in the shoulder. He kept fighting, kept calling out targets, kept doing his job, even as blood soaked through his uniform. The second round hit his thigh, severing the femoral artery. Yara applied a tourniquet with hands that would not stop shaking. She called for emergency extraction, screaming into the radio while bullets chewed the walls around them. Help did not come in time. Isaiah died in her arms, his blood warm on her hands. His last words a request that she tell his mother he loved her. She held him for 3 minutes after he stopped breathing, unable to let go, unable to accept that the man who had watched her back through countless missions was gone. The Army had called it a successful operation. Objectives achieved, acceptable losses. But a board of inquiry had questions about her decisions that day. Why had she not relocated when the civilian compromised their position? Why had she not called for extraction sooner? Why had she failed to keep her spotter alive? Yara had no answers that satisfied them. She had done everything right, and Isaiah had still died. Sometimes that was how war worked. But the board did not want philosophy. They wanted accountability. They wanted someone to blame. They had wanted to end her career until Reeves walked into that room. She opened her eyes and stared at the rock above her head. The memory of Isaiah was a wound that never fully closed, a weight she carried with her through every mission, every decision, every moment of doubt. She had not saved him. She had held him while he bled out and watched the light leave his eyes and carried his body to the extraction helicopter herself because she refused to leave him behind. She would not fail again. Not today. Not with Reeves. The afternoon stretched into evening, and evening faded toward night. Yara watched the compound through the dying light, memorizing the rhythm of the guards, the timing of their movements, the gaps in their coverage. There were weaknesses. There were always weaknesses. The northern entrance was understaffed during the dinner hour. The guard tower on the western corner had a blind spot created by an equipment shed. The wall itself, while high, was old mud brick that would provide handholds for someone who knew how to climb. She had a plan now. Not a good plan, but a plan. At full dark, she began her descent toward the valley floor. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, but she had studied it all day and moved with confidence born of desperation. Each step brought her closer to the compound. Each step brought her closer to the man who had believed in her when no one else did. The village was quiet as she skirted its edges, staying in the shadows, avoiding the few electric lights that marked homes where families were settling in for the night. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance, but none caught her scent. She was a ghost, moving through enemy territory like smoke through fingers. The compound wall loomed ahead, a dark mass against the star-filled sky. Yara pressed herself against a building across the narrow street and studied the guard positions one final time. The western tower was occupied, but the guard was looking inward, watching something happening in the courtyard. The northern entrance was closed, a single sentry leaning against the wall with a bored posture of a man who expected nothing to happen. She checked her weapon. She checked her knife. She checked the small pouch of tools she had brought for locks and obstacles. 32 hours remaining. Yara took a breath, held it, and began to move toward the wall. The wall was rougher than it looked from a distance. Years of weather had eroded the mud brick, creating cracks and handholds that Yara exploited as she climbed. Her fingers found purchase in gaps where mortar had crumbled. Her boots pressed against protrusions that held her weight just long enough to reach the next hold. She moved in silence, each motion deliberate, each breath controlled. The top of the wall was flat and narrow, barely wide enough for her to lie prone. She pressed herself against the surface and scanned the compound below. The courtyard was larger than she had estimated, dominated by a central building that looked like it had once been a school or community center. Smaller structures lined the perimeter, some with lights burning in the windows, others dark and silent. Armed men moved between buildings in pairs, their routes predictable, but their timing irregular enough to make crossing the open ground dangerous. She spotted Farouk immediately. He stood near the entrance to the central building, speaking with two men who listened with the rigid attention of subordinates receiving orders. Even from this distance, Yara could see the confidence in his posture, the easy authority of a man who had never been challenged in his own domain. He was tall and lean, with a close-cropped beard and eyes that seemed to absorb the light from the lanterns around him. This was the man who had executed American soldiers on video. The man who had tortured prisoners for information and pleasure in equal measure. The man who now held Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves in whatever hell existed inside that central building. Yara felt hatred rise in her chest, hot and pure. She pushed it down. Emotion was fuel, but right now, she needed the engine of planning to guide her. Farouk finished his conversation and walked toward a smaller building on the eastern side of the compound. His quarters, probably. The two subordinates headed in different directions, one toward the main gate and one toward the central building. The courtyard fell quiet except for the guards on their routes. Yara waited until the nearest patrol passed beneath her, then lowered herself over the inside of the wall. She dropped the last meter and landed in a crouch, her boots barely making a sound on the packed earth. The shadow of a storage shed swallowed her as she pressed against its wall and listened. Voices from inside the nearest building. Laughter. The clink of glasses. Off-duty fighters relaxing, unaware that an enemy had just breached their perimeter. She moved along the wall of the shed, staying low, using every shadow and corner to mask her approach to the central building. A guard passed within 3 meters of her position, close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on his clothes. He did not look in her direction. He was watching the main gate, expecting threats from outside, not from within. The central building had 2 entrances that she could see. The main door faced the courtyard and was flanked by guards. A secondary door on the side was unguarded, but visible from the eastern guard tower. Neither option was good. She circled to the back of the building and found what she was looking for. A window, high and narrow, probably for ventilation rather than light. It was too small for most people to fit through. Yara was not most people. She pulled herself up using a drainage pipe that groaned under her weight but held. The window had no glass, just wooden shutters that were latched from inside. She pulled her knife and worked the blade through the gap, lifting the latch with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence. The shutters swung inward. Yara pulled herself through the opening, twisting her body to fit through the narrow frame, and dropped into darkness. She landed on a dirt floor in what appeared to be a storage room. Crates and boxes lined the walls, their contents invisible in the gloom. The smell of dust and old cloth filled her nostrils. She crouched in the darkness, letting her eyes adjust, listening for any sign that her entry had been detected. Nothing. The building remained quiet around her. Yara moved to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. Voices somewhere deeper in the structure. Footsteps passing by, then fading. She eased the door open a crack and peered into a hallway lit by a single bare bulb. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with closed doors. To her left, it ended at what looked like an office or command center, light spilling from an open doorway. To her right, it led deeper into the building, toward where she guessed the prisoners would be held. She chose right. The first door she passed was a bathroom, empty and foul-smelling. The second was a small room filled with radio equipment and maps, unmanned but clearly active. She paused long enough to note the frequencies displayed on the equipment and the locations marked on the maps. Intelligence that could save American lives if she ever made it back to report. The third door was different. It was heavier than the others, reinforced with metal bands, and a padlock hung from a hasp on the outside. A cell door. Yara approached it carefully, checking the hallway in both directions before kneeling to examine the lock. It was old but solid, the kind of mechanism that would take time to pick and make noise in the process. She did not have time. She did not have silence to spare. She pulled a small tension wrench and picked from her kit and went to work. The lock resisted her for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her hands remained steady through force of will alone. The lock clicked open. Yara removed the padlock and eased the door inward. The cell beyond was small and dark, lit only by the faint light spilling in from the hallway. The smell hit her first, blood and sweat and fear, the unmistakable odor of a place where terrible things happened. A figure sat slumped against the far wall, wrist bound, head hanging forward. Even in the darkness, even through the blood and bruises that covered his face, Yara recognized him. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves lifted his head slowly, squinting against the light. His left eye was swollen shut. His lips were cracked and bleeding. But when he saw her standing in the doorway, something flickered across his battered features. Okonkwo. His voice was a ragged whisper, barely audible. You should not be here. Yara stepped into the cell and knelt beside him. With respect, sir, that is not your call to make. She pulled her knife and began cutting through the ropes that bound his wrists. The skin beneath was raw and bloody where he had struggled against his restraints. He winced, but did not cry out as circulation returned to his hands. How many men do you have outside? He asked. Yara met his eyes in the darkness. None, sir. It is just me. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then, despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the impossible situation, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Just you. He shook his head slowly. Of course it is. A shout echoed from somewhere else in the building. Then another. Then the sound of running feet. They had been discovered. Yara moved on instinct. She hauled Reeves to his feet, ignoring his grunt of pain as weight settled on his injured leg. There was no time for gentleness. There was no time for anything except movement. Can you walk? She asked. I can move. His jaw was tight with determination. That will have to be enough. She pulled his arm over her shoulder and took as much of his weight as she could manage. He was bigger than her by 40 pounds, and those pounds dragged at her with every step. But she had carried heavier loads through worse terrain. She would carry him out of this compound or die trying. The hallway erupted with activity as they emerged from the cell. A fighter appeared at the far end, rifle raised, shouting in Pashto. Yara dropped Reeves against the wall and fired twice. The man collapsed. She grabbed Reeves again and pulled him in the opposite direction. Storage room, she said. Window. Go. They stumbled down the hallway as more shouts echoed through the building. Yara kicked open the door to the storage room and pushed Reeves inside. He caught himself against a stack of crates, his breathing ragged, his face pale beneath the bruises. The window was too high for him to reach in his condition. Yara dragged a crate beneath it and helped him climb, boosting him toward the narrow opening. He pulled himself through with a strength that surprised her, disappearing into the darkness outside. She was halfway through the window when the door behind her burst open. Yara twisted and fired blind, emptying half a magazine into the doorway. Someone screamed. She did not wait to see if she had hit anyone. She pulled herself through the window and dropped to the ground outside, landing hard beside Reeves. The compound was chaos. Lights flared to life across the courtyard. Men ran in every direction, some toward the central building, others toward the walls. The guard towers swept searchlights across the ground, cutting bright arcs through the darkness. North wall, Yara said. Stay low. They moved through shadows that shrank with every passing second as more lights came on. Reeves limped heavily, his broken leg dragging, but he did not slow her down as much as she had feared. Whatever reserves of strength he had left, he was burning through them now. A patrol appeared ahead of them, 2 men running toward the central building. Yara pulled Reeves behind a water tank and pressed her hand over his mouth, holding them both motionless as the fighters passed within arm's reach. The moment they were gone, she pulled him forward again. The north wall was 30 meters away. 20. 10. A searchlight swept toward them. Yara shoved Reeves flat and dropped beside him, pressing her face into the dirt as the beam passed over their position. It lingered for a heartbeat, then moved on. Now she hissed. They covered the final distance in a desperate scramble. The wall loomed above them, too high to climb quickly, too exposed to attempt slowly. Yara looked for the equipment shed she had spotted during her surveillance, the one that created a blind spot in the western tower's coverage. There, she pointed. Climb on my shoulders. I will boost you. Reeves shook his head. You first. I will hold them off if they find us. Sir, with respect, you can barely stand. Get over that wall. Something flickered in his eyes. The same look he had given her in that hearing room 18 months ago, when he had stood in front of a board of officers and told them they were wrong about her. He did not argue further. He climbed onto her shoulders, and she pushed upward with everything she had left. Reeves caught the top of the wall and pulled himself over. She heard him drop to the other side, heard his sharp intake of breath as his injured leg took the impact. Then she heard something else. A voice behind her, cold and calm, and speaking perfect English. The American woman. I wonder when you would come. Yara turned slowly, her rifle coming up as she moved. Qasim Farouk stood 15 meters away, flanked by 4 armed men. He was dressed simply, a dark tunic over loose trousers, but he held himself like a king surveying his domain. A pistol hung loosely in his right hand, not yet raised, not yet needed. You came alone, he said. For one man. I am impressed. Foolish, but impressed. Yara kept her rifle trained on his chest. She could kill him. She knew she could kill him before his men cut her down. But that would not save Reeves. That would not get either of them home. Let me go, she said. You have lost your prisoner. Cut your losses. Farouk smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I have lost nothing. Your colonel is injured and alone in hostile territory with no extraction. He will not make it 5 kilometers before my men find him. And you, he tilted his head, studying her. You I will keep. A female American soldier. The propaganda value alone is worth more than a dozen colonels. Yara's finger tightened on the trigger. You are assuming I will let you take me alive. I am assuming you want to live. He took a step closer. I am assuming you want your colonel to live. Surrender now, and I will let him go. He is worthless to me without the spectacle of execution. But you are a gift I did not expect. She knew he was lying. She could see it in his eyes, in the slight curve of his lips, in the way his men shifted their weight in anticipation of violence. He would kill Reeves the moment she lowered her weapon. He would kill them both eventually, after he had extracted whatever value he could from their suffering. But he had made one mistake. He had taken a step closer. Yara moved. She dropped to one knee as she fired, putting 2 rounds into the fighter on Farouk's left before pivoting to the right. The compound erupted in gunfire. Bullets snapped past her head, close enough to feel the displaced air. She rolled behind a stack of building materials and came up firing, dropping another man before her magazine ran dry. Farouk had disappeared. His remaining fighters were scrambling for cover, their shots wild and poorly aimed. Yara used the chaos to sprint for the wall, leaping for a handhold, pulling herself up with arms that screamed in protest. A bullet caught her in the side. The impact spun her halfway around, and for a moment she hung from the wall by one hand, her vision swimming, her body refusing to obey her commands. Then Reeves was there, reaching down from the top of the wall, grabbing her wrist, hauling her upward with strength that should have been impossible for a man in his condition. They tumbled over the wall together and hit the ground on the other side. Yara gasped as pain lanced through her side, hot and wet and wrong. She pressed her hand against the wound and felt blood seeping between her fingers. "How bad?" Reeves asked. She forced herself to her feet. "I will tell you when we are safe." They ran into the darkness as shouts rose behind them, and the compound gates began to open. They ran until Yara's legs gave out. It happened without warning. One moment she was moving through the darkness, Reeves beside her, the shouts of pursuit fading behind them. The next moment the ground rushed up to meet her, and she was on her hands and knees, gasping, blood dripping from beneath her pressed hand onto the rocky soil. Reeves caught her before she collapsed completely. "Easy, easy. Let me see." She tried to push him away. "We have to keep moving. We have to stop the bleeding, or you will not make another kilometer." His voice was calm, the voice of a commander who had seen wounds before, who knew what death looked like when it was creeping closer. "Let me see, Okonkwo." "That is an order." Yara stopped fighting. She let him ease her onto her back and pull her hand away from the wound. The pain was a living thing now, pulsing with every heartbeat, spreading tendrils of fire through her abdomen. She stared at the stars above and tried to breathe through it. Reeves worked quickly, pulling supplies from her pack, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her uniform. His hands were steady despite his own injuries, despite the tremor she could see in his arms from exhaustion. "Through and through," he said. "Missed the major organs, I think. You're lucky." "I do not feel lucky." "Lucky is relative." He pressed a field dressing against the wound, and Yara bit down on a scream. "Hold this. Pressure. Do not let up." She pressed her hand against the bandage and felt warmth seeping through almost immediately. The bleeding was not stopping. It was slowing, maybe, but not stopping. Reeves sat back on his heels and looked at her with an expression she could not read in the darkness. "You came alone, across the Karangal." "For me?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question hung between them. Yara could hear the distant sounds of pursuit, engines and voices, Farouk's men organizing for the hunt. They did not have time for this conversation. They did not have time for anything except movement. But she answered anyway. "Because you came for me. When everyone else wanted to throw me away, you stood up. You fought for me." She paused, swallowing against the pain. "I owed you a debt." Reeves was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. "You do not owe me anything, Sergeant. I did what any commander should do. I told the truth about a soldier who deserved better than she was getting. It was more than that. Maybe." He reached out and adjusted the bandage, his touch gentle despite the urgency. "But even if it was, you have paid that debt 10 times over tonight. You understand that, right? Whatever happens next, you have done more than anyone could have asked." Yara met his eyes. "What happens next is we get you home, sir." She forced herself to sit up, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over her. The world tilted and swam, then steadied. She was not dying. Not yet. She had enough left to keep moving, and that would have to be enough. Reeves helped her to her feet, and they stood together in the darkness, 2 wounded soldiers with no support and no extraction, and a small army hunting them through hostile terrain. "There is something you need to know," Reeves said. "Something I learned while they were interrogating me." Yara looked at him. "Farouk is planning an attack. A massacre." He has been gathering fighters for weeks, stockpiling weapons. His voice was heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. There is a refugee camp about 40 kilometers east of here. Bahar. 2,000 civilians, mostly women and children, who fled the fighting in Nuristan. Yara felt something cold settle into her chest. When? Dawn. Tomorrow. He looked toward the mountains, toward the direction of the camp she could not see. That is why he kept me alive. He wanted names. Intelligence contacts, informants, anyone who might have warned the camp or the Americans. I did not give him anything, but it does not matter. The attack is already planned. The fighters are already in position. 2,000 people, women and children. Yara thought of the faces she had seen in other camps, other villages, the hollow eyes of people who had already lost everything and had nothing left to lose except their lives. We have to warn them. Reeves nodded. I have coordinates, patrol schedules, enough information to call in support if we can reach a radio. But we are at least 15 kilometers from the nearest American position, and I do not think either of us is making that distance on foot. The sound of engines grew louder behind them. Headlights appeared on the road below, cutting through the darkness as vehicles spread out to search the valley. Yara looked at the lights, then at Reeves, then at the mountains ahead. Her side was burning. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Every breath was a small victory against the pain trying to drag her down. There is a village, she said, about 3 kilometers north. I passed it on my way in. Small, maybe 20 families. If there is anyone there who is not loyal to Farouk, anyone who might help us, that is a significant risk. Everything about this is a significant risk. She started walking, one foot in front of the other, refusing to let her body quit. But those people in that camp do not have anyone else. And neither do we. Reeves fell in a step beside her. He was limping badly now, his broken leg barely supporting his weight, but he did not complain. He did not slow down. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I would have come for you too, if our positions were reversed. I need you to know that. Yara did not respond. She did not have the breath for words. But something shifted in her chest, some weight that had been pressing down since Fallujah, since Isaiah, since the day she had started believing that she was not worth saving. They moved through the darkness together, hunter and hunted, wounded and desperate, and refusing to stop. Behind them, Farouk's men spread across the valley like a tightening net. Ahead, a village that might offer salvation or death waited in the shadows of the mountains. And somewhere to the east, 2,000 innocent people slept without knowing that dawn might be their last. The clock was still ticking. But now it was not just about rescue anymore. Now it was about stopping a massacre. The village appeared as a cluster of dark shapes against the mountainside, barely distinguishable from the rocks and scrub that surrounded it. No lights burned in any window. No sound carried through the night air. It looked abandoned or asleep or waiting. Yara stopped at the edge of the tree line and studied the buildings through the darkness. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges, a warning sign she recognized from training. Blood loss. Salt. Her body was beginning to shut down, prioritizing core functions, preparing for the end. She was not ready for the end. Not yet. How do you want to approach this? Reeves asked. His voice was strained. He was leaning heavily against a tree, his broken leg finally refusing to support him. I go in alone. You stay here, out of sight. If something goes wrong, you keep moving north. Find a way to get word out about Bahar. Reeves shook his head. I'm not leaving you. Sir, you can barely walk. If this village is hostile, you cannot fight. You cannot run. She met his eyes in the darkness. But you can't survive. You can make sure those 2,000 people do not die for nothing. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gripped her arm. You come back, Sergeant. That is an order. Yes, sir. Yara moved toward the village with her rifle lowered but ready. Every step sent fresh waves of pain radiating from her side. She could feel the bandage growing heavier with blood, could feel her strength draining with each heartbeat. She had an hour left, maybe 2, before she would not be able to move at all. The first building she reached was a small home with a wooden door and a single window covered by cloth. She listened at the door and heard nothing. She moved to the next building and the next, finding the same silence everywhere. Then she heard a sound. A baby crying, quickly hushed, coming from a larger structure near the center of the village. Yara approached the building carefully. It was a communal space of some kind, larger than the homes around it, with a heavy door that stood slightly ajar. Light flickered through the gap, the warm glow of oil lamps. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Women, children, elderly men. They were huddled together in the center of the room, blankets wrapped around their shoulders, fear written across every face. The baby who had been crying fell silent in its mother's arms. No one moved. No one spoke. Yara lowered her rifle slowly, keeping her hands visible. She tried to remember the Pashto phrases she had learned during her deployment. The words came slowly, clumsily. I am American. I need help. Please. An elderly woman near the front of the group rose to her feet. She was small and bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as she studied Yara. She spoke rapidly in Pashto, too fast for Yara to follow. A younger woman translated. She says you are wounded. She says Farouk's men came through the village 2 hours ago, searching for Americans. She says we should turn you over to them. Yara felt her grip tighten on her rifle. She forced herself to relax. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already. I am asking for help. I am asking because there are people who will die if I do not reach my base. The translator relayed her words. The elderly woman responded, her tone harsh. She says Americans bring nothing but death. Her son was killed by a drone strike 3 years ago. Her grandson was taken by Farouk for refusing to fight. She says you're not her problem. Yara swayed on her feet. The room was starting to spin. She reached out and steadied herself against the doorframe. There is a refugee camp, she said. Bahar, 2,000 people. Women like you. Children like these. She gestured toward the small faces watching her with wide eyes. Farouk is going to kill them all. Tomorrow, at dawn. The translator spoke. The elderly woman's expression shifted, something moving behind her eyes. She says she knows Bahar. Her sister's family fled there 6 months ago. Then help me save them. Please. I cannot do this alone. The silence stretched. Yara could feel consciousness slipping away, could feel her legs beginning to buckle. She had done everything she could. She had come so far. And now it came down to this, to the mercy of strangers who had every reason to hate her. The elderly woman spoke again, softer this time. She says there is a man in the village. Her nephew. He has a radio. He was a policeman before Farouk came. She says he hates Farouk more than he hates Americans. Yara felt something loosen in her chest. Where is he? The translator pointed toward a door at the back of the room. She says she will take you to him. But first, she says you need to sit down before you fall down. Yara wanted to argue. There was no time to sit. There was no time for anything except action. But her body made the decision for her. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the doorframe to the floor. Women rushed forward, hands pressed against her wound, checking the bandage, applying pressure. Someone brought water to her lips. The elderly woman knelt beside her, studying her face with an expression that might have been respect. You came alone, the translator said. For your commander. Through Farouk's territory. Yara nodded weakly. The elderly woman spoke again. She says you're either very brave or very stupid. She says her nephew will help you. She says anyone willing to die for their people deserves a chance to live. Yara closed her eyes. The sounds of the room faded around her, the voices blending into a distant hum. She thought of Reeves waiting in the darkness outside. She thought of the camp at Bahar, of the families sleeping peacefully without knowing what was coming. She thought of Isaiah, of his last words, of the promise she had made to tell his mother he loved her. A promise she had kept, a debt she had paid. Stay awake, someone said. American, stay awake. She forced her eyes open. A man was kneeling in front of her, middle-aged with a thick beard and calloused hands. He was holding a radio, old but functional, its antenna extended toward the ceiling. I'm Nazir, he said in accented English. Mayat says you have information about Bahar. She says Farouk is planning something terrible. Yes. Yara grabbed his arm. finding strength she did not know she had left. I need to reach American forces. I need to tell them about the attack. Can you help me? Nasir looked at the radio in his hands, then at the women and children huddled in the room, then back at Yara. Farouk killed my brother, he said. He took my son. He has made this valley a prison for everyone who lives here. He met her eyes. Tell me the frequency. I will help you burn his kingdom down. The radio crackled with static as Nasir adjusted the frequency. Yara recited the numbers from memory, the emergency channel that every American soldier in the region knew by heart. Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but Nasir repeated each digit clearly as he dialed. Someone bring the other American, the elderly woman commanded. The translator relayed the order, and two young men slipped out into the darkness. Yara tried to sit up straighter, tried to project strength she did not feel. The bandage on her side was soaked through now, and someone had replaced it with strips of cloth torn from clean garments. The bleeding had slowed, but not stopped. She was running out of time in more ways than one. The static resolved into a voice. Unidentified station, this is Warhammer Base. Identify yourself and state your traffic. Yara reached for the radio. Nasir handed it to her, and she pressed the transmit button with fingers that trembled. Warhammer Base, this is Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo, serial number 47265891. I am with Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves. We have escaped enemy captivity and have critical intelligence regarding an imminent attack. Request immediate relay to forward operating base Valor. Silence. Then the voice returned, sharper now, urgent. Staff Sergeant Okonkwo, authenticate with your unit code word. Yara closed her eyes, searching her exhausted mind for the weekly authentication code. It came to her like a gift. Authenticate Broken Arrow 7. Another pause. Then a different voice came on the line, older, more authoritative. Sergeant Okonkwo, this is Colonel Harrington at Warhammer. We have been searching for you and Colonel Reeves for 18 hours. What is your current position and status? The door opened behind her. Reeves limped into the room, supported by the two young men who had retrieved him. His face was gray with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes sharpened when he saw the radio in Yara's hand. She handed it to him. He needs to hear this from you, sir. Reeves took the radio and sank onto a bench beside her. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of command that had defined his entire career. Colonel Harrington, this is Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves. I have critical intelligence regarding a planned massacre at the Bahar refugee camp. Attack is scheduled for dawn, approximately 4 hours from now. Enemy force estimated at 60 to 80 fighters with vehicle-mounted weapons. I have coordinates for staging areas and patrol routes. He rattled off the information he had gathered during his captivity, the details he had memorized while Farouk's men beat him and threatened him and tried to break him. Grid coordinates, unit compositions, timeline, everything the American forces would need to intercept the attack and save 2,000 lives. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. Then Harrington's voice returned. Colonel Reeves, we are scrambling assets now. Can you provide your current location for extraction? Reeves looked at Nasir. The Afghan man gave him coordinates in Pashto, and the translator converted them to the grid system the military used. We are at a village approximately 8 kilometers north of Darwan. 2 American personnel, both wounded. We have friendly locals providing assistance. Understood. Extraction inbound. ETA, approximately 90 minutes. Can you hold your position? Yara and Reeves exchange a look. They both knew what that question really meant. Farouk's men were still searching the valley. 90 minutes was a long time when hunters were closing in. We will hold, Reeves said. Warhammer, be advised that Qasim Farouk is personally commanding the search. High-value target. Recommend any extraction force be prepared for contact. Copy that, Colonel. Help is on the way. Warhammer out. The radio went silent. Yara let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The message was sent. The warning was delivered. Whatever happened now, those 2,000 people at Bahar had a chance. Nasir took the radio back and turned to speak with his aunt. The elderly woman listened, then began issuing orders to the others in the room. People moved with sudden purpose, gathering belongings, preparing to leave. The translator knelt beside Yara. She says Farouk will know someone helped you. When he finds out, he will burn this village to the ground. We must go to the mountains until the Americans push him out. Yara felt guilt twist in her chest. I'm sorry. I did not mean to bring this on you. The elderly woman spoke, and the translator smiled slightly as she relayed the words. She says, do not apologize. She says Farouk has been a plague on this valley for 5 years. She says it is time someone fought back, and she is glad it was a woman who started the fight. Despite everything, despite the pain and the fear and the exhaustion, Yara felt something warm spread through her chest. She had come here expecting enemies. She had found allies instead. Nasir returned with 2 old rifles, bolt-action weapons that looked like they had survived wars older than anyone in the room. He handed one to Reeves and kept the other for himself. My cousins will take the women and children to the caves, he said. I will stay with you until your people come. If Farouk's men find us, they will have to fight for their victory. Reeves checked the rifle with practiced hands. You do not have to do this. Nasir's jaw tightened. My son is 12 years old. Farouk took him 8 months ago, forced him to carry ammunition for his fighters. I do not know if he is alive or dead. He looked at Reeves with eyes that burned with old pain. I have to do this. For him. For everyone Farouk has taken from us. The women and children filed out of the building, disappearing into the night with the quiet efficiency of people who had practiced this evacuation before. Within minutes, only Nasir, Yara, Reeves, and 3 other village men remained. Yara forced herself to her feet. The world swayed, but she steadied herself against a wall and picked up her rifle. She had lost a lot of blood. She was operating on fumes and willpower, but she was not going to lie down and wait. Where do we set up? She asked. Reeves studied her for a moment, then nodded with something like pride. Southern approach. That is where they will come from. We find cover, we hold the line, and we give those helicopters time to reach us. He looked around at the small group of defenders, American and Afghan, standing together. 90 minutes. That is all we need. Somewhere in the distance, an engine roared. Then another. The sound of vehicles moving through the valley, getting closer. Yara checked her ammunition. 1 magazine remaining. Maybe 30 rounds. It would have to be enough. They took positions behind a low stone wall at the southern edge of the village. It was not much cover, barely waist-high in most places, but it offered clear sight lines down the slope toward the valley floor. If Farouk's men came from that direction, they would have to cross 50 meters of open ground to reach the village. 50 meters was a long way when people were shooting at you. Yara settled into a prone position, her rifle resting on the top of the wall. The cold stone pressed against her wound, and she had to bite back a cry of pain. Beside her, Reeves took a knee, his borrowed rifle shouldered, his eyes scanning the darkness below. Nasir positioned his cousins at intervals along the wall, spacing them to create overlapping fields of fire. They were farmers and shepherds, not soldiers, but they handled their weapons with the familiarity of men who had grown up in a land where violence was never far away. The sound of engines grew louder. Headlights appeared on the road below, 3 vehicles moving in convoy. They stopped at the base of the slope, and figures began dismounting. Yara counted 12, 14, 18, more than 3-to-1 odds. And those were just the ones she could see. Hold fire until they reached the halfway point, Reeves said quietly. Make every shot count. The figures began moving up the slope, spreading out as they advanced. They were cautious, professional, moving from cover to cover with weapons raised. These were not undisciplined militia fighters. These were Farouk's best men, hardened by years of combat. Yara picked her target, a man near the center of the line who moved with the confidence of a leader. She tracked him through her sights, controlling her breathing, waiting for the moment. 30 meters. 25. 20. Now Reeves said. Yara squeezed the trigger. Her target dropped. Along the wall, rifles cracked in rapid succession as the village men opened fire. 3 more figures fell. The rest scattered, diving for cover behind rocks and scrub, returning fire with a ferocity that sent bullets snapping over Yara's head. She shifted targets, found another man trying to flank left, dropped him with 2 shots. Her rifle clicked empty. She ejected the magazine and slammed at her last one. 15 rounds remaining. The firefight settled into a brutal rhythm. Farouk's men would advance, the defenders would drive them back, and then the cycle would repeat. Minutes passed like hours. Yara lost count of how many times she pulled the trigger, how many figures she saw fall. One of Nazir's cousins cried out and slumped behind the wall, clutching his shoulder. Another crawled to help him, pressing cloth against the wound. They were taking casualties. They cannot hold forever. Reeves fired 3 times in rapid succession, then ducked as return fire chewed chunks from the wall above his head. How much time? Yara checked her watch. The numbers blurred, then focused. 50 minutes. Too long. They were not going to last 50 minutes. A new sound cut through the gunfire. A vehicle engine, louder than the others, coming fast. Yara looked down the slope and saw a technical racing up the road, a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, muzzle flashing as it sprayed bullets toward their position. The wall exploded around them. Stone fragments flew like shrapnel. One of the village men screamed and went down. Yara pressed herself flat as rounds tore through the air inches above her back. "We have to move," Nazir shouted. "Fall back to the buildings." They ran. Yara's legs barely obeyed her commands. Reeves grabbed her arm and half-dragged her toward the nearest structure as the machine gun continued to rake their former position. They crashed through a doorway and pressed against the interior wall, gasping. The Technical's engine roared as it crested the slope and entered the village. Men poured from the other vehicles behind it, emboldened by the heavy weapons cover. Yara looked around the room. Nazir and 2 of his cousins had made it. Reeves was beside her. The others were either dead or scattered. 4 defenders, against what sounded like 20 or more attackers. And 45 minutes until extraction. "There's a back door," Nazir said. "We can try to reach the mountains." Reeves shook his head. "They will run us down in the open. We make our stand here." Yara checked her rifle. 7 rounds left. She pulled her pistol and confirmed a full magazine. 22 shots total. It was not enough. It was nowhere near enough. Then she heard it. A voice outside, amplified by a megaphone, speaking in accented English. "Staff Sergeant Okonkwo, I know you are in there. I must admit, you have impressed me. A woman, alone, accomplishing what a battalion could not." He paused. "But ends now. Surrender yourself, and I will let the others live. Your colonel, these villagers, they can walk away. All I want is you." Farouk. He had come himself. Yara moved to a window and peered through a crack in the shutters. The warlord stood beside the Technical, surrounded by his fighters, utterly confident in his victory. He held the megaphone loosely, like a man who had all the time in the world. "You have 30 seconds to decide," he continued. "After that, we burn this building to the ground with everyone inside." Reeves grabbed her arm. "Do not even think about it. Sir, if I go out there, you survive. The villagers survive. You complete the mission. The mission is complete. Harrington has the coordinates. Bahar will be saved." He pulled her away from the window. "I did not let you walk into that hearing room alone, and I am not letting you walk out that door alone. We survive together or we die together. That is how this works." Yara looked at him, at the man who had fought for her when no one else would, at the commander who had endured torture rather than betray his people, at the soldier who was prepared to die beside her in a village whose name he had not known 12 hours ago. 20 seconds, Farouk called. Nazir moved to another window, rifle ready. "My cousins and I are not leaving either." He glanced at Reeves. "You Americans came to our country uninvited. You brought war to our valleys. But tonight, you also brought something else." He looked at Yara. "You brought courage, and that is something worth dying beside." 10 seconds. Yara raised her rifle. 7 rounds. She would make every one of them count. Then the night split open with thunder. Helicopters. 3 of them, coming in fast from the north, their rotors beating the air into submission, their guns already blazing. Rockets streaked down, and the Technical exploded in a ball of fire. Machine gun rounds chewed through Farouk's fighters like a scythe, through wheat. Yara watched through the window as chaos erupted outside. Men ran in every direction, some firing uselessly at the aircraft, others simply trying to escape. The helicopters circled like predators, methodical, merciless. And in the middle of it all, Qasim Farouk stood frozen, staring up at the sky as his kingdom collapsed around him. Yara stepped out of the building. She walked toward him through the smoke and fire, rifle raised, ignoring the pain that screamed through her body with every step. He saw her coming and raised his pistol, but she was faster. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to his knees. She stood over him as the helicopters landed and American soldiers poured out to secure the area. "You were right about one thing," she said. "It does end now." Farouk looked up at her, with hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this changes anything? There will be others. There will always be others. Maybe." Yara lowered her rifle. "But not you. Not anymore." She turned and walked toward the helicopters, toward Reeves, who was limping out to meet her, toward the medics who were already rushing forward with stretchers and equipment. Behind her, soldiers took Farouk into custody. His war was over, and hers finally was too. The helicopter ride was a blur of noise and motion and hands pressing against her wound. Yara drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of shouted conversations, the whine of medical equipment, the steady thump of rotors that meant she was still alive. She remembered Reeves beside her, his hand gripping hers, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Stay with me, Sergeant. That is an order. Stay with me." She remembered trying to respond, try to tell him that she was not going anywhere, but the words would not come. The darkness kept pulling at her, warm and soft and tempting. She remembered a medic's face, young and focused, saying something about blood pressure and transfusions and surgical teams standing by. Then she remembered nothing at all. When Yara opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed. White ceiling, white walls, the steady beep of monitors marking her heartbeat. Sunlight streamed through a window, warm and golden, painting stripes across the blanket that covered her. She was alive. The realization settled over her slowly, like waking from a dream that had felt too real. She was alive. She had made it. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain flared through her side, sharp enough to steal her breath. She fell back against the pillows and focused on breathing until the worst of it passed. A voice came from beside her. "I would not recommend sudden movements for at least another week." Yara turned her head. Reeves sat in a chair by her bed, his leg encased in a proper cast now, crutches leaning against the wall beside him. He looked better than the last time she had seen him clearly. The bruises on his face were fading to yellow and green. His eyes were tired but alert. "Sir." Her voice came out as a croak. She swallowed and tried again. "How long?" 3 days. You lost a lot of blood. Surgeons had to remove part of your spleen and repair damage to your intestine." He leaned forward. They said it was touch and go for a while. Said if you had waited another hour to get treatment, you would not have made it. 3 days. Yara processed this information slowly. The last thing she remembered clearly was standing over Farouk, watching soldiers take him away. "Bahar," she said. "The camp." Reeve smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him since before his capture. "Safe. Every single person." The strike force hit Farouk's staging areas 2 hours before the attack was scheduled to launch. Caught them completely off guard. He shook his head. 2,000 people, Sergeant. 2,000 people are alive because of what you did." Yara closed her eyes. The weight that had been pressing on her chest since she first saw that video of Reeves on his knees finally began to lift. She had done it. Against all odds, against every reasonable expectation, she had done it. "What about Nazir?" she asked. "The villagers." Reeves nodded. "Safe. We evacuated them to a secure location until the area can be stabilized. Nazir has been asking about you. He wanted to make sure the American woman who started a war in his village was going to survive it." Yara almost laughed, but the pain in her side stopped her. "And Farouk? In custody, being transferred to Bagram for interrogation. He will spend the rest of his life in a cell, assuming he makes it to trial." Reeves paused. There are a lot of people who want a piece of him. Not all of them are interested in due process. She should have felt satisfaction at that. Justice for all the people Farouk had killed, all the families he had destroyed, all the terror he had inflicted on that valley for years. But mostly she just felt tired. Tired and empty and ready for this chapter of her life to be over. "Sir," she said, "what happens now?" "To me." Reeves was quiet for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came through official channels yesterday." He handed it to her. Yara unfolded the paper with fingers that still trembled slightly. It was a memorandum from the commanding general of Regional Command East. She read it slowly, her exhausted mind struggling to process the formal language. The memorandum outlined her actions over the past 4 days. Unauthorized departure from Forward Operating Base Valor. Solo infiltration of enemy territory. Rescue of a senior officer from enemy captivity. Transmission of critical intelligence that prevented a mass casualty event. Participation in defensive operations resulting in the death or capture of 23 enemy combatants, including a high-value target. The final paragraph made her read it twice to make sure she understood. In recognition of extraordinary heroism and selfless service above and beyond the call of duty, Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo is hereby recommended for the Silver Star. Additionally, all charges related to her unauthorized departure from FOB Valor are hereby dismissed in light of the exceptional circumstances and outcomes of her actions. Yara looked up at Reeves. "They're not court-martialing me. They're giving you a medal." He smiled again, softer this time. "I told you, whatever happened, you had already paid any debt 10 times over." Command agreed. She set the paper down on her lap and stared at the ceiling. A medal. After everything she had done, everything she had risked, they were giving her a medal and pretending that the rules she had broken did not matter. It felt strange. Not wrong, exactly, but strange. "For what it is worth," Reeves said, "I put in the recommendation myself. Wrote it from this chair while you were in surgery." He paused. "I have written a lot of commendations in my career, Sergeant. Award citations for soldiers who did brave things in impossible situations. But I have never written anything like what I wrote for you." Yara did not know what to say. She thought of all the reasons she had given herself for going after him. The debt, the obligation, the need to prove that she was worth the second chance he had given her. But sitting here now, alive against all odds, she realized that none of those reasons told the whole story. She had gone because it was the right thing to do. Because leaving him behind was not something she could live with. Because some things mattered more than regulations and odds and the reasonable expectation of survival. Because that was who she was, who she had always been. "Sir," she said quietly, "thank you for everything." Reeves shook his head. "No, Sergeant. Thank you." He reached out and squeezed her hand, the same way he had on the helicopter, the same way he had when he was pulling her over that wall. "I am alive because of you. Do not ever forget that." A knock came at the door. A nurse entered, followed by a familiar face. Adiz stood in the doorway, still in uniform, her eyes red like she had been crying. She took one look at Yara and crossed the room in 3 quick strides, wrapping her arms around her as gently as she could manage. "You idiot," Adiz whispered. "You absolute idiot. I thought you were dead. We all thought you were dead." Yara hugged her back, ignoring the pain in her side. "I told you I would come back." "No, you did not. You left without saying goodbye properly." Adiz pulled back and wiped her eyes. "You owe me dinner, remember. The nicest restaurant in Houston." Yara smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in days. "I remember," she said, "and I always pay my debts." 6 weeks later, Yara stood in the sun at Forward Operating Base Valor, wearing her dress uniform for the first time since arriving in Afghanistan. The wound in her side had healed to a tight scar that pulled when she moved too quickly. The doctors said she would always feel it, a permanent reminder of the night she had walked into the Karengal Valley alone. She did not mind. Some things were worth remembering. The parade ground was full. Soldiers from every unit on the base had gathered to witness the ceremony, standing in formation under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Flags snapped in the mountain breeze. Officers stood at attention near a small platform that had been constructed for the occasion. Yara's mother had wanted to fly in for the ceremony, but travel restrictions and short notice had made it impossible. Instead, she had sent a video message that Yara had watched 17 times in her hospital bed, her mother's face filling the screen, tears streaming down her cheeks as she said how proud she was, how proud Yara's father would have been if he had lived to see this day. Her father, 22 years in the Army, 2 tours in Desert Storm, a heart attack at 53 that had taken him before Yara ever got the chance to show him what she could become. She thought of him now as she waited for her name to be called. She thought of the stories he used to tell about service and sacrifice and the bonds between soldiers that nothing could break. She thought of the way he would straighten her shoulders when she slouched and tell her that warriors carried themselves with pride. She stood a little straighter. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reeves walked to the platform, still using a cane, but moving with the steady determination that defined everything he did. He had refused medical evacuation back to the States, insisting on staying until his unit's deployment was complete. The cast was off his leg now, replaced by a brace that would come off in another month. He looked out at the assembled soldiers and began to speak. "We are here today to recognize extraordinary valor in the face of overwhelming odds." He paused, letting the words settle. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo did something that defied every reasonable expectation. She crossed enemy territory alone. She infiltrated a hostile compound without support. She rescued a fellow soldier from captivity and transmitted intelligence that saved 2,000 innocent lives. Yara felt the eyes of every soldier on the parade ground turn toward her. She kept her gaze fixed forward, her face neutral, her heart pounding against her ribs. But what the official citation cannot capture, Reeves continued, is the choice she made. The choice to act when action seemed impossible. The choice to risk everything for someone she believed was worth saving. He looked directly at her. That choice is what separates ordinary soldiers from extraordinary ones. That choice is what makes heroes. He motioned for her to approach the platform. She walked forward, each step feeling both endless and too quick. The sun was warm on her face. The wind carried the smell of dust and diesel and the distant mountains where she had almost died. She climbed the steps and stood at attention before Reeves. He held a small blue box in his hands. Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo, for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, for extraordinary heroism and selfless service above and beyond the call of duty, it is my privilege to present you with the Silver Star. He opened the box. The metal gleamed inside, a silver star suspended from a ribbon of red, white, and blue. He lifted it carefully and pinned it to her chest, his hands steady, his eyes meeting hers. "You earned this," he said quietly, too soft for anyone else to hear. "Every bit of it." "Thank you, sir," she whispered back. He stepped back and saluted. She returned the salute, crisp and sharp, the way her father had taught her when she was 12 years old and dreaming of uniforms and honor and being part of something bigger than herself. The parade ground erupted in applause. Soldiers broke formation to crowd around her, hands reaching out to shake hers, voices offering congratulations and admiration. She saw Kruger near the front, his weathered face split by a rare smile. She saw Tomas Estrada beaming like she had just won a championship. She saw faces she recognized and faces she did not, all of them looking at her like she was something worth celebrating. Adiz pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Yara. Protocol forgotten. "Houston," she said, "the nicest restaurant. You are buying." Yara laughed. It came out easier than she expected, natural and warm and free of the weight she had carried for so long. "I already told you. I always pay my debts." The crowd began to disperse, soldiers returning to duties and routines, the ceremony complete. Yara stayed on the platform for a moment longer, looking out at the base that had been her home for 14 months, at the mountains that had nearly killed her, at the sky that stretched endlessly above. She thought of Isaiah Webb, buried in Georgia soil, mourned by a mother who had received Yara's letter and written back to say that knowing someone had been with her son at the end brought her peace. She thought of Nazir and his cousins, rebuilding their village with American assistance. The old woman who had called her brave, sending word through official channels that she expected Yara to visit when the fighting was done. She thought of the 2,000 people at Bahar who would never know her name, who would never know how close they had come to dying, who were alive because she had made a choice in the darkness of a hospital ward while watching a video of a man on his knees. She thought of Reeves, who had seen something in her when she could not see it in herself, who had fought for her and believed in her and given her the chance to become who she was always meant to be. And she thought of herself, the woman she had been before Fallujah, before Isaiah, before the weight of guilt had settled onto her shoulders like a cloak she could not remove. The woman she had become in the years since, carrying that weight, letting it define her, believing that she was broken beyond repair. That woman was gone now, not forgotten, but transformed. The guilt would always be there, a scar on her soul, just like the scar on her side. But it no longer owned her. It no longer told her who she was. She was Staff Sergeant Yara Okonkwo. She was a soldier. She was a warrior. She was someone who ran toward danger when others ran away, who fought for the people she loved, who refused to leave anyone behind. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just needed someone to show her. Yara stepped down from the platform and walked toward the future, the silver star gleaming on her chest, the sun warm on her face, the weight finally lifted from her shoulders. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell us about the person in your life who believed in you when you could not believe in yourself. Or share your favorite moment from Sergeant Okonkwo's journey. Stories like hers remind us that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act anyway for the people we refuse to leave behind.